Hello and welcome back, guys. So today what we are going to be looking at is examiner's report of SBR, Strategic Business Reporting. So September 2018. So let's look at it. So this was the first general comments. Let's look at general comments first of all. So this was the first setting of new SBR exam, which tests professional competencies within the corporate reporting environment. The SBR syllabus is not significantly different to P2 syllabus, although the SBR exam requires and therefore allocates significantly more marks to written answers rather than numerical ones. Candidates should have referred to many technical articles readily available at ACCA website for guidance on preparation for the examination. The articles provide excellent evidence on how to approach questions and how to answer them in such a way to maximize potential marks. The report uses the advice available in the following exam technique articles. These, alongside the technical articles available in the same location, are essential reading for SBR candidates because so that will be helpful as well. So the September 2018 SBR examination consists of two sections, as we know already, Section A and Section B. So Section A consists of two questions. Total is 50 marks. Section B contains two questions of 25 marks each. So all questions are compulsory. SBR candidates are examined on accounting concepts and principles and their ability to apply this knowledge to real life scenarios, demonstrate their ability to make strategic business reporting decisions. Candidates cannot rely on single textbook or revision course to pass this examination because the required skills are not developed through rote learning, but rather a deeper understanding and application of knowledge and understanding to the scenario provided. A well-prepared candidate should have reviewed relevant websites, including one of those standard setters, IASB, the profession, and the ACCA to maintain their knowledge and keep up with topical issues, because there will be a question based upon the next thing, what's happening. So studying and preparing for the exam. So key advice for the candidates preparing for this examination is available in Exam Techniques for Success article. The best way to achieve a good marks in SPR is to practice exam style questions from the earliest opportunity and in due course full mock exams. This will help you to embed those exam techniques that work for you and help you develop good time management before your exam. Of course, those who are actually familiar with the numerical ones might not be actually familiar with the written ones. So it's very important to actually do a mock test so that you actually familiarize yourself with the questions and you can actually pass it in that way. This will help you to embed those exam techniques that work for you and help you develop good time management before your exam. Even if you don't have time to work all available like questions in full, planning answers is often sufficient to understand whether they are on the right lines in terms of identification of issues, split of marks, points to cover. Of course, practicing questions and preparing answers plans is only useful if you review your work against a model question, model answer. So yeah, if you actually review it alongside your model answers, then you actually can know which one is your weakest part, which one you should work upon, or even better, benefit from tutor feedback so you can learn what you can do better for next time. So additional advice in exam technique is also available in stepping from financial reporting article. So you will score very little in SPR exam for simply regulating the requirements of standards. You should start building the skills necessary to analyze scenarios, apply standards, consider the effects of required treatments on stakeholders, and discuss wraparound issues such as rationale. So you don't actually have to quote the same thing from the standards itself. You actually have to apply it to a given scenario from different stakeholders perspective. So you should also attempt exam style questions from an early stage of your study. So not the last minute preparation, always started from the very early. So it is also very valuable to get feedback on your answers from tutor, fellow students, work colleagues. Alternatively, you could join study groups on ACCA learning community and find a study buddy, which is always helpful because the more discussions you have, the more knowledge you will acquire. So in this particular exam, you are not required to only write the numerical answers. You are actually required to write the required to apply the techniques, concepts, principles that you've learned. So exam approach and techniques, be aware of the requirements of each question. If the verbs used in the requirements are analyzed, discussed critically, assess, then this is what the candidates must do. The provision of numbers in isolation will not suffice. So that's more important. So it's important to consider the format of our answer. A good answer is well signposted. In other words, the marker is led through the answer to a question so that they can clearly identify the different issues and some requirements have been addressed, as well as labeling parts of question. Good exam technique is to use heading in the answer so that it'll be easier for all the different issues to be talked about, and then it'll be easy for the marker as well. So specific comment on exam. Question 1. So what was his comment? This question was divided into three parts. First part required the candidate to prepare explanatory notes discussing three separate issues: how goodwill should be calculated and a correcting journal. And second, why equity accounting is appropriate for recording an investment, and how the gain or loss on disposal of investment should be recorded, and how to treat the remaining investment post disposal. Many candidates gained high marks in this section provided that they separated the complex calculations from their explanations. Techniques such as producing the calculations on one page whilst simultaneously explaining them on second page proved an effective exam technique. So yeah, always remember this technique. As you're writing your calculations on one page, explaining them on the second page is always an efficient exam technique. Even I do encourage it as well. So and encouraged an explanation of each element of the calculation alongside the production of goodwill calculation in one, the carrying amount in two, and gain on disposal in three. Whilst most candidates are naturally drawn to numbers, most of the marks in this section were allocated to explanation. The application of IFRS 3 business combination weak answers to 1 provided insufficient explanation of the accounting treatment related to each aspect of the goodwill calculation for which marks were available if explained. The share exchange, the contingent consideration were a significant minority of the candidates erroneously referenced IAS 37 provision contingent liabilities and contingent assets. The appropriate valuation of NCI and the fair value of net assets acquired. Part 2 was generally well answered, although in some cases the carrying amount of associate was overlooked for incorrect. In part 3, explanation were generally good, although the disposal calculation often incorrect, for example, omitting the fair value of the retained investment. That is more important. Part 1b, the requirement. Part 1b required a discussion on the accounting treatment of an investment as an financial asset acquisition or business acquisition. Whether this would change the International Accounting Standards Board's proposed amendments to the definition of business. The section was generally weak. Most candidates provided limited or no discussion of the exposure draft, and many answers focused on defining an asset with minimal reference to the requirements of business combination under IFRS 3. Readers of examiners' approach articles should be aware that candidates should be able to produce reports relating to corporate performance and to evaluate proposed changes to reporting financial performance. Within the questions that examines current issues, it is likely that exposure draft may be examined in terms of the key areas of change. It is important that candidates read around the subject and not rely on a single textbook or revision course. The level of knowledge and understanding required at this level does not come through rote learning, but a deeper understanding and application of subject matter through researching websites, articles of standard setters, the profession. The ACCA tutors should encourage candidates to consider how their knowledge can be applied in practice to develop their understanding of the subject matter and integrate such an approach to their learning through class discussions and activities. Part 1C asks candidates to discuss whether a bond sold with favorable repurchase rights should be recognized under IFRS 9 financial instruments and to prepare calculations to show the impact on financial statements, providing that candidate identified the key aspect of substance, marks were awarded accordingly. Question 2. The question had two sections. Question 2A required a discussion on appropriate accounting treatment for issues. Question 2B. Question A was discussion on appropriate accounting treatment for two issues. 2B for a discussion of ethical issues arising, including any action that accountant and business should take. The question was generally well answered, although some candidates made it difficult for markers to award marks because of the way their answers was laid out. A good approach to answering this style of question is provided in ACCA article Exam Techniques for Success, page 4. Adopting the same approach to this question, candidates should first scan the scenario to identify the situations. For example, 2AI impairment, use of revaluation provision for 2AII, 2A2 held for sale, restructuring provisions. Identify the accounting issues and consider suggesting accounting treatment. Interwoven throughout the scenario is the ethical issue of inappropriate behavior of CEOs, Chief Operating Officer. Candidates with good exam techniques should briefly explain the content of their written answer. Candidates with good exam techniques should briefly explain the content of their written answer to avoid repetition. Writing the same points twice loses valuable time and certainly will not score twice. Good practice is to have separate headings for each situation with lines in between for ease of marking. 2AI was well answered and candidates easily identified the subsidence as an impairment indicator. Good answer explained the impairment process and its impact upon the financial statements. Most answers correctly explained why the use of revaluation reserves was inappropriate in this case, although care should be taken not to use up time expanding on ethical implications. The answer to question 2B, it is worth referring back to the requirements. Discuss the accounting treatment. According to question 2AI, that spent too long considering the need for provision limited their potential for marks. In this case, no constructive obligation existed. The key aspect was need for impairment only. So 2A2 was better answered with most candidates explaining the need for treatment as disposal groups. 2II was better answered with most candidates explaining the need for treatment of disposal group and restructuring provision. 2B was well answered in most cases with better answers applying ethical principles to the scenario, it was pleasing to see fewer answers merely listing out rote learned ethical requirements in this setting. The question 3. This question had two sections, each with subsections. Question 3a described two situations involving stakes in and sales of a development project, and 3b required a discussion on external disclosures on intangible assets from perspective of an investor. The SCCA examiner's approach article states candidates require an in-depth knowledge of the conceptual frameworks which sets out the concepts upon the IFRS are based. Therefore, candidates should be able to discuss the consistency of framework with each IFRS that is examined. 3AI is a good illustration of how candidates can be tested on this. It required candidates to explain the recognition criteria of an asset under the version of IASB conceptual framework of financial reporting, which is 2010. Sorry, the 2015 proposed revision and consider whether the criteria are the same under IAS 38 intangible assets. According to this section, were weak in general. Many answers begin by defining an asset without then providing the recognition criteria. Mhm. Probable future economic benefit and a reliable measure. Most answers referred the additional need under IAS 38 for an identifiable non-monetary assets without physical substance. However, the importance of probable future benefits and the assumption that externally acquired assets meets this requirement was often overlooked. Okay, so when we are talking about IAS 38, we often tend to think about it like it's a non-monetary assets without physical substance, but we forget that it's an asset as well, where there should be probable economic benefits or future benefits should flow into the entity, or it could be acquired, which was overlooked by the people who answered. A significant number of answers did not refer to exposure draft, and those that tended to stated merely the removal of probability criterion. Significant number of answers did not refer to exposure draft, and those that did tended to state merely the removal of probability criterion. They just stated that. So 3A2 asked candidates to discuss the impact on the financial statements over 2 years if the recognition criteria under IAS 38 intangible assets were met, and briefly if not met. Answers to this section were generally weak. Some candidates missed that the question specifically referred to recognition criteria being met, which in case derecognition would be inappropriate. Very few candidates identified the need for an impairment review under IAS 36 impairment of assets if there were doubts over recoverability from the intangible assets. So as we all know, we have to do some impairment review at the end of the period. So they missed that. The scenario describes how the director wished to write the intangibles off as a change in accounting estimate. Most candidates highlighted this and discussed the applicability of IAS 8 accounting policy, changes in accounting standards, estimates, and errors. Candidates who considered the accounting treatment if the recognition criteria were not met tended to distinguish between research and development costs rather than considering the need for retrospective correction of an error under IAS 8. Mhm. So if there is an error, you have to actually retrospectively correct it. So they missed that part. So 3A2, 3A3 required a discussion on treatment of the proceeds of sale of development project as revenue. Some candidates outlined the IFRS 15 list, which was not applicable to the scenario. Surprisingly, few candidates identified the disposal as part of normal operations, but a gain on disposal. It is worth reminding candidates of the advice from the article Exams techniques for success. You will score very little if your approach to the SBR exam is to simply memorize technical material and then brain dump it in your own answer booklet. Right? Written answers must be relevant to the given scenario. The requirements of 3B also tie in with comments outlined in article examples of change in approach. SBR questions will adopt the perspective of a wider group of stakeholders. For example, the investor perspective. uh, Investors have to deal with many uncertainties that surround the preparation of financial statements, and thus the interpretation of published information from an investor's or user's viewpoint is also an issue for an accountant. Likewise, the article stepping from financial reporting advises the candidates should practice from the point of view of different stakeholders as the syllabus places significant emphasis on stakeholder impact. So as I've told you earlier as well, so it's at the top of the thing, it's stakeholders. At the bottom is conceptual framework. So how that's going to impact the stakeholders at the top, that should be talked about. And thinking from those perspective or multiple perspective will give us a bird eye view of the stakeholders being impacted, and we will be able to write better answers about it. In this case, candidates' answer to question 3B were generally good, where discussions included the accounting choices and subjective aspects of IAS 38 and IFRS 3. However, some answers limited opportunities for marks by not considering both standards. They did not consider both standards. 3B2 asks for discussion on whether integrated reporting can enhance reporting for intangible assets. Whilst many candidates were familiar with integrated reporting, fewer applied it to situations relating to intangible assets. Fewer applied. Question 4. The final question came in two parts. Question 4 asks for advice on whether four aspects of alternative performance measures achieve fair presentation in financial statements. 4B described. 4A was four aspects of alternative performance measures. 4B describes a scenario in which an erroneous net cash generated from operating activities was presented with narrative provided requiring candidates to prepare an adjusted statement of net cash generated from operating activities or reconciliation of net cash generated from by operating activities to operating free cash flow and an explanation of the adjustment made. So 4A, candidate relevant technical article, additional performance measures were available on ACCA website. Candidate who had read the article stepping from business reporting would be aware that this aspect is examinable. One area on strategic business reporting analysis that is worthy of specific mention is additional performance measure. The area is not examined in earlier levels of qualification. Examples include adjusted revenue or profit and key performance indicators. It was pleasing to see that question 4A was often well described, reasoned, and applied to the scenario. However, answer to question B 4B were more varied with explanation requirement. Question 4B3 and attempts to question 4B2 and 1 and question 4B2 varying in quality. To summarize, whilst the performance in first SBR exam was pleasing, further SBR candidates needs to prepare differently than they might previously have done for P2. Even though the content of the syllabus is almost identical, SBR is assessed differently. Then P2, lots of advice on how to do this is available in the articles and links provided in examiner's report. Please read this thoroughly and follow the strategies suggested therein. So yeah, that's always a good thing to do. And then actually there is a lot of references over here as well, so you could actually go and look it up. So we will be discussing about that in more detail as well. So until next time, bye bye.